I like to even take it back a little bit more in history prior to meeting Keith and kind of give you an idea how this whole class kind of came about and my personal journey into this work. And when I think about it, first I like to ask this question. There's three basic modalities that you can get out of this program. One is NLP, Neuro Linguistics. The other is life coaching, which would be separate. And the other is hypnosis or hypnotherapy. Now I know, because you're in this room, you're wise enough to understand that all three of those together make all three of them better. Okay? But probably when you were first interested in this work, you probably picked one of those three initially to search for or whatever. And I'm curious which one was that. And I like to kind of talk about all of these and how this class kind of got together. First of all, when I first got involved in this, it wasn't any of those things. All right, I was involved in this little church as I did that allergy seminar in the basement of, and at the time it was called the New Age Christian Church. Now I know that's kind of a weird name, as Keith had mentioned, you know, and people looked at it, and anybody that was more on that Christian side was looking at that word New Age, and they were going like this to it, you know, and then everybody that was on more of that New Age side, they saw that word Christian, they were doing the same thing, you know. And since that time, they have renamed it. If you went to it today, it's still an operation. It's called the Interfaith Community Church. One of the reasons it's called that is because I encouraged them to change their name. However, the name actually did fit them. Now, how I got involved in that was, well, I don't know, I just liked the community of spiritual places. So I mean, when I was married and my wife was, at the time, was very Presbyterian. I kind of grew up kind of Presbyterian. So we were very active in the Presbyterian church. We were in the choir, I was a youth group leader. They even let me teach Sunday school, which was kind of dangerous for them, for their belief systems. And anyhow, you know, life throws a curveball. We kind of split, and my wife got the church. And so anyway, I was seeking out another kind of place to hang out on Sundays, and of course my belief systems weren't quite all Presbyterian, and you know, I was kind of learning. I was reading books and, you know, hoping to expand my awareness of a variety of spiritual philosophies. And so I stumbled in to the New Age Christian Church. And it was probably one of the better things I had done in my life. Because as I entered this little group that was, you know, primarily raised Christian, but were seeking other things, kind of like me, and yet holding, you know, as much of their values as they had, it's not like they were wrong, is that they were just want to expand. I walked into this group of people that were like me at the time. Now, there were two very instrumental people in my life that I met there, and they were the people who ran the church, and I'll be proud to say their names are Alice and Owen Barnes. Now, Alice is still with us here on this rock. Owen has gone off to other pastures. They were an older couple, and Alice was a psychic, and still is, and Owen was a spiritual or energy healer. And they were often offering classes at, you know, the church, as many do. And I went into Alice's psychic development class, and like the beginning class they had Alice was saying that everyone had a spiritual gift. You know, everyone in the world had a spiritual gift, and if they would follow the path of that gift, their life would be amazing and great. You know, so it sounded really good. They said, now, what we're going to do is we're going to meditate. And our first class was to meditate on what is that gift. So I did my best to meditate and listen to what came to me. And what came to me was spiritual healing. And at the time, I had not thought of any of this stuff. All right, but I, said spiritual healing, so I thought, well, I should look into that. So I start reading books on energy healing, and actually a book. The title literally was Spiritual Healing, and that book probably had the most impact on me. And so I was reading that book, and it was written by a spiritual healer, and what methods he used, and one of them was that he said in the book that he would often refer his clients to a hypnotherapist, because the hypnotherapist could regress them back to the root cause in their life that was the cause of the illness that they were having today. And so when I was reading that, I said, well, if I need a hypnotherapist to be a spiritual healer, why not just become a hypnotherapist? In fact, it really wasn't that way. I always wanted to be a motivational speaker, but whenever I spoke, people just went to sleep. So I thought I'd be a hypnotist instead. Why go against the grain? Anyhow, at that little church place, in the back of the room, there was, all the flyers of various classes and events that were going on, and there was one flyer there that said, "Learn hypnosis." And I took it, and I said, well, why don't I learn it? So I went and took this class that was held here in Seattle, and it was done at a community college, not that it was sponsored by the community college, but anyway, I enjoyed it. I would think we were much further along than that class taught me today. However, it got me started. And like I said, I seemed to have a knack for it. So I started practicing with the members of the church and their issues and whatnot, and like I said, I seemed to have a knack for it. So people were getting changes and whatnot. And over a course of time, Alice says to me at a lunch, she goes, "Michael, I think you should learn NLP." And I go, like most people do when they hear those letters put together, I go, "What's NLP, Alice?" And she goes, "I don't know." That's the typical answer you get. So I don't know what it is. All I know is I used to have a fear of heights. And a friend of mine knows this stuff, and I no longer have this fear, just working with him one time. And I go, wow, sounds interesting. And if you say it, Alice, I believe you. So I started seeking an NLP class. Now, when I took an NLP class, they were called, not an NLP practitioner program, not an NLP coach program, they were called an NLP programmer. All right? Yeah. That's what they were called. You went to a programmer. If the letters, the acronym wasn't scary enough, NLP stood for Neuro Linguistic Programming. And at the time, that programming word was kind of threatening. I would look at it more as patterns. However, the Neuro Linguistic Programming is how it came out. And what it means is that our neurology actually communicates. Every thought that runs through our head is somehow being communicated through our body. That's the neuro-linguistic part. And because it does this, it can give us information. We can observe someone's behavior and understand the patterns they run to create the behavior that leads to a certain outcome or consequence.
We are interrupting Michael's presentation to demonstrate an observable behavioral pattern to give you an example of neuro-linguistic communication with a simple demonstration which was filmed later in this program.
You're going to find out, if you don't know already, that your mind is actually out here. Your brain may be in here, but your mind is all over out here. If I can get an example of that, can I just borrow somebody for a couple minutes up here? You want to come up, Sophia? Now, I'm going to ask you to look at these fine people here, okay? And I want you to, if you don't mind, think of something that you had purchased, but after you bought it, you thought it was kind of junk. Just think about something like that. All right. Now, take that off for a minute. Now, think about something that you purchased that after you purchased you thought was very valuable. All right? Can you think about that for a moment? Now, that's down there, huh? Okay. And the other thing is over here somewhere. I don't know how many of you kind of noticed it. When think about the thing that you bought that you thought was junk. See where she's looking? And she looked down here for the other thing. Now, just so you know, sales-wise, if you knew this about whoever, and it could be different for everyone, the last place you want your material to be referenced is here, because that would be thrown in with all the other junk or mine. And this is where you want it. And if you knew that, you could say, well, you know, our competitor's product, you know, but our product, you know, to reference where her mind is storing the representations that fit into this thing. And that's true with, like, think of a very pleasant experience in general. I mean, anything. This wonderful thing. You notice how she's looking up there? Now, that's because that representation's up there. Now, once you know this, there's all kinds of magical stuff you can do with it, and we'll show you what to do, because now you're going to be playing with the software, how the brain actually represents this, because that's where the pleasant one is, but an unpleasant one would be somewhere else.
It's now time to return to Michael's presentation. After reviewing this presentation, visit bennettstellar.org.
And one of the presuppositions of this NLP stuff is that we always work perfectly. Right? Now, a lot of times when I say that, people go, what do you mean perfectly? I mean, I've made some mistakes. Well, if you have made them, and if you haven't changed something in there unconsciously, you're still making them, because that's how perfectly we work. I mean, if there's somebody who's afraid of a spider, which, by the way, is a #1 fear, I understand, in England. It's like #3 here in the United States. But, you know, when someone sees a spider, you know, they never just kind of see a spider and go, oh, oh my God, I forgot to be afraid. No, they see them, and they're afraid 100% of the time. That is perfection. Right? Now, what's cool is that since there is a pattern and that our mind and body are kind of one, so we can watch the patterns non-verbally and verbally when we communicate with someone, we can understand how they do this. And by understanding how they do this, we can, once we have that pattern, that program, we can reprogram it or make a new pattern that has a different behavior that leads to a different consequence. Now, I went to find this programmer, and I called up the instructor, and I said, you know, I was told I should learn this NLP stuff. Tell me a little bit about your class. And they told me one thing that was kind of discouraging, how much it costs. Right? As soon as I got how much it cost, and unfortunately at the time I couldn't afford the class. But what the trainer said is, you are a trainer. I mean, I told her enough about myself. I mean, I was a trainer. I was a safety trainer for Hyster Company. And I don't know if you're familiar with that name. You might have seen them in a Costco somewhere, Hyster forklifts. And I have this little claim to fame. I mean, if nothing else in my life happens, this is my little claim to fame. I don't know if you've ever looked in a want ads or have ever applied or ever thought of or happened to see a ad in there, a help wanted ad for a forklift driver. But if you have, you'll notice that it'll say on there these days, must be certified. Now, the reason that is because when kind of another mentor in my training career that you know, helped me get into this safety training business, when they were doing classes and he wanted me to help them kind of promote the classes, which eventually got me doing it. And keep in mind, I want you to know, I never have driven a forklift other than when I eventually started training people in my life. Never as a job, all right? And yet, when I'd go in there and do these training classes, we would certify them, right? Once we did, and I suggested to this individual that we should send out to the entire Heister mailing list that it is a law that they needed to be trained. And it really is the company's responsibility. It's an OSHA regulation, and it's a line about, you know, this big in a book this thick of safety regulations that says if you're operating one of these as an employee, you must be trained to operate it. So we sent that out there, and all of a sudden people go, "You got to train them?" Wow, the concept, right? So I started doing these training. I mean, I've done probably thousands of them over the years, and people, we'd have them, you know, over classes for individuals. They'd come in, we'd give them certificates. And then because we were training them, this odd thing happened. The liability for forklift driving for Heister Company, the legal liabilities and things like that were like way down. Statistically, Washington had the lowest legal liability in forklifts for the entire company. And because this showed up to them, they go, "I'm curious, what's going on there in Washington?" So they called up our branch, and they said, "What are you guys doing up there that would make this happen?" And we said, "We're training them." All right, we're actually going around, we're telling them they need to be trained. People are responding to this. And so Heister Company decided to take our little model of what we were doing up in Washington and spread it throughout the entire country. And because we kept giving certificates out, companies just assumed that they needed to be certified to do this. So even though it's their responsibility, they won't hire anybody that isn't certified, which kind of created its own little industry. A few years ago, was doing this program in Australia, and we're going to this little town, I think of Maryborough, Australia, right, or something like that, Marysborough or something like that. And there was a building that said forklift certification courses right there. Like, oh my God, it's all over the world. Anyway, but because I had, you know, this background in communications, and what the woman told me is that, you know, in NLP, that NLP is all about communications. And not only external communications between individuals and groups of individuals, but also our own communication within ourselves, to really kind of communicate and understand the unconscious programs that are in there, so we can make changes in ourselves, and we can also help others make these changes. And by understanding, I remember reading a quote somewhere with Milton Erickson, and since you guys have had some exposure to hypnotherapy, I'm sure you've heard this guy's name. Milton, if you haven't, you'll hear a lot in this class. Milton Erickson is considered a legend in the field of hypnotherapy. In fact, much of NLP, linking those together, come from him. Now, the thing about one of the things I read about Milton's quote was that his patients were his patients because they, as a patient, was out of rapport with their own unconscious mind. And I don't blame people, because there's some elements in psychology to kind of blame everything on the subconscious mind, like all the evils in there and these bad habits and stuff, that if it's, you know, what can you do with it, you know? And so by able to communicate and understand these patterns, and I personally believe this, and I hope you will if you don't already, is that there is no bad part inside of us. Nothing bad. Every part, regardless if we enjoy the behavior or not, or the consequences that behavior generates, is a bad part. Every part of our mind is doing its best for a positive intention for self. It just learned a pattern somewhere and it's just following the pattern, and it doesn't know any better, really. And this is where the hypnosis part comes in. Now, hypnosis technically is really just a brainwave state, right? I mean, technically that's what it is. I mean, alpha brainwave state, very natural state. Some people are afraid of it, and they have all kinds of beliefs around it. And I kind of preferred it when it was black magic, you know, because they weren't trying to regulate it so much. But it's kind of, people are realizing that people who do hypnosis or practice hypnotherapy can really make significant changes. It beats psychology by a long shot. Anyhow, as a hypnotherapist, though, when we take advantage of this brainwave state, all we're really taking advantage is the power of suggestion. Now, you'll find, if you don't already know, the power of suggestion can work in any state. However, apparently, because this brainwave state is open more to suggestion, the power of suggestion can be enhanced if someone is in this state. Now, it's very natural. I mean, before you go to sleep every night, or whenever you go to sleep, you're going to pass right through that hypnotic state. Now, and before you get up every morning, you also do it. You'll recognize it when you aren't quite, you're aware, but you're not quite awake either. You know, you might be in this wonderful state where you're just kind of laying there and everything's just great. You're aware, but you just really don't want to move. And at that moment, you know, be careful what you're thinking, because you can suggest, because I know, you know, I like to think of myself as a pretty successful or a highly skilled hypnotherapist. But I know of one hypnotherapist that's better than any hypnotherapist in the world. And that hypnotherapist is experience. Experience is the greatest of all hypnotists. I mean, if people have problems in their life, they didn't have some hypnotherapist knock them out and have them relax and tell them how to act, you know, silly or make you know, judgments. No, experience did that. And sometimes with just one session, experience has changed entire lives. And by understanding that, you know, I do my best to recreate that experience. Now, I understand this brainwave state of hypnosis, kind of, in my opinion, and everybody in this business has their own opinion how this works, is that, you know, when we're conscious, you know, we have all this language and linear processing, and when we're asleep, we have all this unconscious, goofy experiences that we're not even moving, but we're having all these experiences. And that little bridge in between the conscious judgment of things and having experience without actually moving is this thing, this bridge called hypnosis. And that's why suggestion can have a power, because it is closer to experience without having to move. It's so great that we have a thing called hypnosis, because if it wasn't for that, we might actually have to do the same experience again and then make new judgments about it. Like if somehow somebody got mean and they took you and they threw you over a couch and you hit a wall and it was very painful and you made all these judgments about yourself and also them and the world at that time, what you did is a little hypnotic experience. You know, your unconscious mind had this experience, and then all of a sudden you made this judgment about that experience, and since the brain is a linking machine, locked in. Now, just to give you an example. Hi.
Bennett Stellar?
Yes, it is.
And I'm here. I'm sorry I'm late.
No problem. Come on in. Find a seat and we'll... I'm just going over, I'm Michael, by the way. And
I'm Sophia.
hi, Sophia. And I'm just giving kind of a little background of the kind of things we're going to be learning over our course of time together here. Anyhow, so I know that if I have an experience, I have this little judgment machine over here that makes all kinds of judgments. You know what it is. It's that voice in your head right now saying, is this guy crazy? What's he talking about? You know, well, maybe that is true. I don't know. Constantly talking. Blah, 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 blah. Buddhist monks spend 20 years of their lives just to shut that thing up. All right? Now, blah, 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 blah. Now, I heard, and I don't know, I don't have personal evidence of this study myself, but I was told that That little chatterbox in our head makes 40,000 statements a day on an average. And they tell me 80% of those statements are negative. Now think about this, because to me, this is the self-hypnosis machine right here, constantly, every day, making judgments about every experience we have and blah, 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 right? Now, can you think about it? 40,000 statements, 80% of those negatives. You know what that's like? That's like having my mother next to me 24/7. Michael, you can't do that. What are you doing there, Michael? Here's my favorite, and this is true. Michael, why don't you get a real job? But I go, Mom, I don't want a real job. She was telling me just a few months ago, you know, there's a tool and die company coming into town. You should come down here and get a real job. Anyway. So, blah, 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 this thing is talking. It's constantly making judgments, and because it's making judgments of our experience, it's having a huge effect on that. And I would not, you know, thanks to hypnosis, we don't have to have somebody throw us over the couch and have us hit the wall again and suddenly make better judgments about that experience so we can have a better life. We can put somebody in a hypnotic state and we can tell them how to have a new behavior, and for some reason that seems to stick under those conditions. Now, to me, how many of you here believe in affirmations? Everybody here? We're pretty much? Now, affirmations, to me, happen all the time, and this little judgment machine is making them. But just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, you know, the cliche, if you will, of affirmations is somebody might be standing in front of a mirror and looking at themselves and saying, I'm a wonderful person, I'm a wonderful person, I'm a wonderful person. Now, if this is happening, I know the person who is saying, I am a wonderful person, as they're saying that, there's a voice in their head saying, no, you're not. No, you're not. No, you're not. And I know that voice is there because if it wasn't, they wouldn't be standing in front of a mirror saying, I'm a wonderful person 1,000 times, right? They'd already know that. And believe me, they didn't probably have to stand in front of the mirror and say I'm an awful stupid person 1,000 times to get that one in there. No, that happened through the miracle of experience. That may have been told to them once, or they made that judgment about themselves once, and then all of a sudden they entered into being into a trance state. See, in Ericksonian hypnosis, the trance experience is much greater. That we're constantly in one trance or another. Now, I was telling this to my more recent classes, because whenever you say that you may be involved in hypnosis or you're a hypnotist or whatever, what do you think you hear from most people when you say that? You probably, if you are a hypnotherapist, you'll know this. What?
The sound of footsteps running away.
Yeah, that's one. But one of the common things people like to say is, you're not going to make me cluck like a chicken, bark like a dog, or something like that. And of course, when they ask me this, you're not going to make me cluck like a chicken, I go, well, of course I am. That's why I got into this work. In fact, just in case I'm successful, would you cluck like a chicken for a moment, just so I can hear what it would sound like? And every once in a while I get them to do it. And I go, oh, wow, I did it. I got you to cluck like a chicken. But here's the thing. You know, what people think is, you snap your fingers. The hypnotist will snap their fingers, and somebody will cluck like a chicken. Snap their fingers, and they'll cluck like a chicken. And they're all afraid of this, that somebody might have the power to go this, and they'll react uncontrollably, in this case, clucking like a chicken. However, there are people out there that may be afraid of this, but all someone else has to do is flip them their middle finger, and they'll scream like an idiot. And they'll do that consistently, too. In fact, any time a person does a behavior of any kind, says something to you or whatever, and it upsets you, or you react good or bad, just think, somebody just snapped a finger and you're clucking like a chicken. Don't like the way someone's dressed, you get upset about it, they snapped a finger, you clucked like a chicken. And so I like the Buddhist philosophy where, it's supposed to mean to be awake. Now, to be awake, you can, look outside of these stimulus response behaviors that our neurology has learned, these hypnotic or post-hypnotic suggestions that we are living in, because at one time or another, experience happened, and we made a judgment about that experience, and it linked it, and we were now in a hypnotic, post-hypnotic trance ever since. So every time that person, whatever they do, snaps their finger, we cluck like chickens. Now, to give you an example of this, let's say, and I'd like to explore at this moment, a little philosophy about our mind, all right? Because I look at the mind as divided up in like 3 different components, all having a different job and a different way of working. And maybe at this moment we'll look at the brain, all right? So the conscious mind, or maybe just a layer beyond that, what we call critical factor. That little voice that just keeps going on and on, even though I told you about it, it's still going on and on, right? And when it's making these judgments, it's making these suggestions all the time, and it works based on logic. All right. Now, there's a part of our brain that it fires off one synapse to another synapse to another logical synapse to another logical synapse, and if you do this activity in your brain really fast, they give you a high IQ. All right, that you can fire off, but that particular part of us is working kind of like a computer. See, a computer is a serial processing unit, and that's what this is. It runs on a series of firing off, and that's how jokes work, really. You take a person on a little journey of one logical step to another logical step, another logical step, and then all of a sudden you throw the punchline in some other context, and if you do this just right, it causes this behavior called laughter. Now, anyhow, so this mind is constantly trying to make sense of things based on what it knows. And so if I have an experience, like I'm walking in this room here, and all of a sudden, for some reason, I stumble over forward, and I have this experience. Now, at this moment, my unconscious mind is going, I wonder what this means. I just had this experience. And that logical processing unit goes, I'm clumsy. That, by the way, is an affirmation. And I always think that affirmations are the most powerful in the moment of experience. All right? I mean, you can sit there and try to beat out, the other ones later, but it's the ones in the moment of experience that have all the power, right? So in the moment of this experience, I made this affirmation that says, I'm clumsy. Now, that probably wouldn't be so bad if it was only in hotel rooms with weird-looking carpet. However, we have other parts of our mind that can cause this a more global problem. But let's first look at this judgment machine that fires off in a series, right? I always think it works kind of like this. I don't know if you've seen this movie. You probably have. Most of you have. It's called Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Now, if you haven't seen it, it's kind of a spoof of the King Arthur days, and there's one scene in there I always think that makes me think of the logical, linear processing left brain activities we have, and that is, it's the scene where they're accusing, or the villagers are accusing this woman of being a witch, right? And they're bringing her up to the town wise man or judge or whatever to make this determination. And of course, to help things out, they put a carrot tied to her nose to make her look more like a witch. This is what I remember, and I may paraphrase a bit, but you'll get the idea. So anyhow, so they drag this woman up to this guy, and he says, now, he's got to make a judgment on this. He's got to make a logical judgment. So he says, so if she's a witch, what would we do with her? And of course the villagers all scream, we burn witches, we burn witches. All right, so it only makes sense then that if she's a witch, she must be able to be burned. She can't be a witch if she can't be burned. Right? So, makes sense. So in order for her to be a witch, she must be able to be burned. So the guy goes, so what else burns? I mean, what must she be like to burn? And somebody goes, wood? You know, the whole crowd goes, wood burns, wood burns. Oh, so in order for her to be a witch, she must be able to be burned, so therefore she must be like wood. Because if she's like wood, she can be burned, so therefore she could be a witch. So in order for her to be like wood, what else must she be like, you know, to be like wood? And somebody goes, well, like what does wood do? And the person goes, somebody goes, wood floats? Yeah, wood floats, wood floats. So they go, okay. So if she's able to float, she'll be like wood, and if she's like wood, she could be burned, so therefore she could be a witch. Now she goes, so what else floats? And then somebody goes, a duck? Oh yeah, because a duck floats. So okay, so if she weighs the same as a duck, she would be able to float, therefore she'd be like wood, therefore she could burn, and therefore she's a witch. So they go take the woman over to some huge scale, right? They put a duck on one end and this woman on the other, and it balances out equally, so they haul her off as a witch, right? Now, this would be even funnier if it wasn't true. I had a chance, I took a seminar one time, and I went to Edinburgh, Scotland. Now, Edinburgh, Scotland bragged that they were the home of witch burning. Not really bragged, they were kind of, you know, fatted about it, really. Guilty, feeling bad about it. But they had, but this is where this whole idea came from. And they had actually a heart engraved into this area of their sidewalks that people still spit on this thing in protest of the days they used to burn witches on that very spot. And the tour guides there were telling me that, see, if someone was being accused of a witch, they would take her and they would throw her into the water. If she floated, she was a witch. If she sank, she drowned.
But she wasn't a witch.
But she was a witch. She was redeemed, however. You know, she still lost her life. So the tour guide said that, well, the women, if they were accused of witch, would put heavy objects like rocks and things in their clothing. So if they were thrown in the water, they would sink because they preferred drowning over burning. Now, I don't know what crazy person came up with that one. Today, we probably say it had to do with their body fat content, if they floated easier than someone else. But who knows if that's even true. But but I always think of that as this, somehow somebody made some judgment that seemed to make sense at the time and able to sell that one. Now, anyway, so this, you know, probably wouldn't be so bad if we made this judgment I made about being clumsy in hotel rooms with this type of carpet. However, we have another processor type processing unit in our brain where we're referred to as the subconscious or unconscious part of our brain. And what that does is it fires synapses in multiple areas of our brain. It's more of what we would call a parallel processor. Like if you took a bunch of computers and you hooked them all up, but they were individual, each of those computers are a serial processing device. I mean, it looks like it's doing all kinds of things there, but it's running one string of code very quickly all the way down to the end and back again. It's a serial process. But if you had several of those hooked together that could communicate with each other, you'd have more of a parallel type processing. And our unconscious mind has this ability. So it doesn't necessarily just leave this affirmation in this context. It can generalize it by going on. So right away the unconscious mind says, oh, so we made this judgment now that we're clumsy. So what does clumsy? What do I know? What else do I know about clumsy? The mind goes, oh, I remember when I was just a kid, Aunt Edna dropped a glass of milk at Christmas, whatever year, and Mom said she was clumsy. Oh, I remember that person, you know, they stumbled over here, or they dropped that, or they walked into this, and all of these references of clumsy come up. So the unconscious mind, in order to follow that suggestion, can't just trip in hotel rooms every once in a while. It's got to drop things. It's got to run into things. just to keep the suggestion going. You know, when you go and, if you've ever seen a stage hypnosis show, right? This is kind of an exaggeration of what we live life every day in some false reality. Some of those false realities are great and wonderful, great hypnotic, post-hypnotic environments, and some not so great, but they're all false. We live in a world of imagination, and that's the good news. But here's the rule. When our will is in conflict with imagination, imagination will always win. Oh, you might be able to beat down imagination over time if you're really good at it. But however, and it is our will, our conscious will, has to outdo our unconscious imagination. We live in the world of imagination. I mean, you could just take a person who is afraid of a spider. No matter how big that spider is, they're hundreds of times bigger than it is. That spider should be afraid of them. However, even though they realize it's not logical, many people with these kind of fears realize it doesn't make sense, which is interesting in itself. How could it not make sense to them? I mean, it's their experience. They may have had experience of this all their lives. What makes them think that they could be not this? Well, that's the third level. There's an area, supposedly, that they call like our God part, right? Where we can believe in something that we have not seen or something greater than ourselves, that we can look out and be the witness of our own experiences. The unconscious mind is a stimulus response machine. But there's a part of us that can look and say, other people don't do this. Maybe I shouldn't be able to do this. But it's always been my experience. But nevertheless, they can look at it and say, you know what? I really shouldn't be afraid of it. But they can't resist it. And that's because there's a little switching mechanism. I look at a little switching mechanism in our brain that, that if something has strong fear attached to it, the little switch goes right down to an automatic fight or flight type response, right? If there isn't a strong fear or emotion attached to it, it kind of goes up to what they call cognitive thinking, and people make logical choices. Now, I could work with people with spiders all the time, and I could, one of the ways we get rid of it is we have their image inside their head that they're referencing for the fear of that spider. I wish I had my pop-up phobia book. I didn't bring it with me, because it works so effectively. I could flip through this. It's a pop-up book, if you haven't seen it, that you open up and it pops out, and it's actually like a pop-out spider, and it has a pop-out building for fear of heights, a pop-out clown, for fear of clowns. And if somebody has that fear, they will run, if not pulled away. They can't touch the cardboard pop-up book. Right? If they have a fear of snakes, they can't go near it. If they have a fear of spiders, they can't go. You wouldn't believe. I was going through the pop-up book once, and we had a woman in the class that was fear of clowns. I didn't know it until I turned the page, and there was this clown that popped out of it, That woman was starting to hyperventilate. I mean, she was going nuts just looking at the paper clown. Now, I love that because that kind of gives evidence of what our world is kind of like here. It's not the outside world that they're not afraid of that spider. They don't even know that spider. That spider could be a Nobel Peace Prize winning spider, right? It's all species profiling. Right? No, there is an image of the evil spider in their head somewhere. In fact, there's an image for everything that we know in our head somewhere. And when the world shows us or presents something that makes our mind go into the archives and pull that out so we know what we're looking at, if it has strong emotion to it, it automatically reacts and goes that fight or flight. And no matter how illogical it is, they run. But one of the things that we can do is, they say to a spider person, I'd find that image in their head, the one they're really afraid of. It's certainly not the real spider, because I could pop up book spider, or they could see it on TV or in a magazine, and they'll still run. Even though there's no spider, it's just a picture. Right? So it's not really that. There's something in their head that gets referenced in, and this looks close enough to it that the unconscious mind pulls in the archives, pulls up that scary memory, and we're reacting from the old memory, not the current situation. And if you get nothing else out of this class except that, you'll be able to make all kinds of miracles with people. Because all you need to do is get that representation. Whether it's a sound in their head that causes that feeling, or the image in their head that causes that feeling, this is really all you need to do, because you just need to change the associations of emotions that are attached to that representation, or change the representation so it has different feelings attached to it, and you'll solve the problem. And that's all I'm thinking whenever I'm working with anyone. Somehow, I have to get that representation, or I have to get a different association attached to that representation, that, because the emotions are different, each emotion has a different belief to it. Each emotion that we're in, I mean, when we're feeling love and all that, the world's a wonderful place. Our beliefs about ourselves and the world are a wonderful place. But when we're angry or frustrated, our beliefs change. And they're very different behaviors. And because each of those behaviors have a different consequence. So if we have an emotion that's somehow triggered from some experience in our head that leads to the emotion, we're going to have some behavior as a result of that, and we're going to have some consequence. And of course, in our world, we want, people come to us for different consequences. So we must have to change the behavior, which we're going to have to change the representation somehow. But anyhow, all I have to do is take that representation and I make it bigger. And usually, if you make an image bigger, you'll find in people's head, they'll get more fear. And then I ask them to make the image in their mind, their memory, even bigger. You can do that, by the way. You'll find out it's possible. We're playing with the software now. And they get even more fear. And I'll say, that image of the spider's as big as this room. And they'll go, or that image of the spider is as big as the city of Seattle. They'll go, like that. And then I'll take it, that image of the spider is as big as the state of Washington. And then they'll say something like, oh, that's ridiculous. It was ridiculous when we got this big, all right? It was ridiculous at least to the side of the building. But it didn't seem ridiculous to them because they were still not able to get the cognitive thinking. They were still running on the fight or flight experience thing, so I can make this bigger, ridiculously big, long before it's ridiculous. But when the problem is solved, as soon as it gets so big, and see, it's just called the compulsion blowout, you get the image so big, because the image can be infinitely big, but the feelings can only get so bad. And when they have hit the threshold of how bad they can feel, we take that image and just kick it beyond that. It cuts the connection between the bad feeling and the image in this case. And all of a sudden now it doesn't matter anymore. The internal image. Now once that internal image is gone, then they can see a spider, and then it goes to that cognitive thinking area, so they can realize, that one's not going to hurt me. That one I should be aware of. This one's not so bad. But anyhow, so that's kind of world. And now, the beautiful part of NLP and hypnosis, it works so effectively. The bad news is it works so effectively for us as practitioners. See, I love the psychology business model. I mean, I know many people that went to a therapist 20 years of their life, every week. I know someone personally, about $60,000 worth of therapy over 20 years. Their copay, about $19,000 of it, over for social anxiety disorder. Something we took out in about 30 minutes. Because the difference is, instead of trying to fight illogic with logic, like why do you feel that way? We go in and fight illogic with illogic. We find the experience in there, right? But for this person, it happens to be second or third grade, and they were asked to come up and do a math problem. And they get up there, and by God, as a second grader or a third grader, they got it wrong. Oh, my God. But what made that so powerful is that the teacher told them how stupid they must be to make that mistake. And that suggestion stuck. And so she was so afraid, she couldn't even write an email to her sister without sweating in her current day. And she was going for 20 years to get rid of that. So you got to give them that. They do have a great business model. If you can get somebody coming back for 20 years, monthly or weekly, you got to give them that. However, at a certain point, people might hear that there are other modalities out there that might be more effective, and then they come to an NLP practitioner or a hypnotist, and then they once they come there, they're ready to change, or they believe that you should make them change. So either you help them within a very few sessions, or you don't help them in a very few sessions. They're not going to hang around either way. So we hope to help them, because then we get referrals, and that's how we build our business, mainly in NLP and hypnosis, by building referrals. Or they have other problems. But in comes the business model called life coaching. Kind of the new kid on the block, but is raced up to the top. And see, a life coach, the business model is you get to keep the client around. It's a long-term relationship with a client, as long as you're constantly moving them forward towards their goals. I mean, we're not messing around with the same thing. We're going to clean up something, and if they're happy about that, they'll want you to take bigger, because luckily, unconsciously, we're programmed to always want more and more. So once they achieve a certain level, they'll want to achieve another greater level. And it's one of the things we have, why we've created our dream sculpting program, which will be the final weekend of our time together as far as this class goes. And you'll be able to sculpt out your dreams. And that is a step-by-step process that we developed, so you can take and make go for the client to have the biggest dreams. And of course, you're going to have a set of steps with them or yourself. And where they don't, see, the life coach typically is designed to kind of, well, set or get some kind of strategy that will be successful. And then once they set out, well, this is what it's going to take for you to be successful, then your job as a life coach is to kind of badger them, if you will, to make sure they do those steps. Well, here's the thing about that. If you have to badger them, it's not natural for them to actually do this. And it's going to be difficult for the client to continually do that, even if they have short-term processes, because they are not programmed to succeed in that area. And that's why NLP helps the life coach, because we're looking at the unconscious process that keeps them from actually able to accomplish that goal. Not just, well, this is how other people do it. You got to do the same thing. Well, they could have read that in a book. Now, I have evidence of this in, I have one of my students and someone they got their own sales business now. I mean, they go around to mainly real estate companies and financial institutions. They're paid thousands of dollars to go in to increase the sales for all the employees in there. Now, her mantra is this: to be successful as a salesperson, you must make phone calls. Lots of them. Minimum 50 calls a day. And the evidence, statistically, she can back it up. And even in the very office that she's working in, the person who is most successful, who is making those goals happen, making those sales, are doing just that. So it's not even a foreign concept. They can actually see the evidence in somebody else. However, even though she beats it in, that they must make those 50 calls. How many of them actually do it? Very little. She gave them a success model, a proven one. Even by the guy that's sitting in the other office, it's a proven one. But somehow they don't do it. Now here's the difference between a life coach and an NLP, Neuro Linguistic life coach. Because see, we'll know as a life coach if they're not making those calls already. They're just not programmed to do it. And I can tell you the program. She asks me every time I'm in Charlotte, she goes, come on in, I'm going to a client, tell them about this, right? About, the NLP part of it. Because I'll go in there and I'll say, so, you guys are going to make calls. Yeah, we like to make calls, yeah, but you're not actually making the calls. Now, I'll tell you what the programming is that's keeping you from doing it. You see, I'll tell you what's happening. You're supposed to consciously make the call. But what's happening in your mind, there's an image in your mind that you have made this call and you are going to be rejected and they're going to hang up and they're going to do something. This is in your unconscious mind. This is what you're thinking as or before you dial the phone. Now, since you're doing that, your unconscious mind already has made the call. So to it's already made the call and failed. It is already dumping the bad feelings in your body that is, not feeling so good. And because you're not feeling good, you're not motivated to make the call. You consciously didn't make the call. However, the unconscious mind is you've already done the call. And you've failed. Now, your unconscious mind is kind of a pleasure, pain, it moves towards pleasure. And it'll avoid pain where possible. So since it's already made the call and feeling pain about it, it's looking unconsciously for something more pleasurable to do, like go get a cup of coffee, or maybe it's time to go to the bathroom, or maybe I should talk to somebody or make this call, another call that has nothing to do with what your job is. And then you're consciously not making it. For example, and I would say this, they're all sitting around in some boardroom, I said, if the receptionist came in here right now and laid a message on each of you that there is a client calling you and wants you to call back because they're interested in what you have, how many of you would be here right now? They all say, well, I certainly wouldn't. I'd be out there getting, wonder why you want to make that call. That call, you have another false reality. You have an image in your head that one's going to be successful. You can't wait to make that one. So if you really want to be successful, this is a behavior that is proven to be successful, but you need to be programmed. So you are like that guy over in that other office or that woman in that other office that is that way. They automatically assume they're shocked if they get, some bad news. You need that kind of programming inside. You need those images running through so it generates different feelings. So as a neuro-linguistic coach / hypnotherapist, luckily you can take advantage of all the power of suggestion through language and understanding how people tick and through the neuro-linguistic information you're getting, and realize that if you choose to be someone like a life coach, you can help people achieve greater and greater success. And because you have that power of hypnosis, you can overcome almost any behavior that gets in the way. And just remember that every behavior has a certain consequence. If they want a different consequence, they need another behavior. Now, I realized when I was putting this class together initially, because when I went to that NLP class, and how I got there is this. I did follow the woman's advice. I went in there, the trainer's advice. I went into my corporation or company and I said, well, they tell me this NLP stuff's all about communication. And that it would benefit me as a trainer if I took it. And we actually convinced my supervisor that he finally found some value in this, so he said he would pay half of my tuition to go become an NLP practitioner. And I go, wow, that's great. So then Well, I didn't have the other half, but nevertheless, I called up Alice and I said, Alice, you wouldn't believe it, my company, this NLP stuff that you said, was good. She said, my company is willing to pay half of it. Unfortunately, I don't have the other half, but and Alice said, well, if your company is willing to pay half of your tuition, the church will pay the other half. And I go, wow, this stuff must be something, right? I mean, these two organizations couldn't be further apart. I mean, that forklift, industrial truck manufacturer dealer couldn't be any more conservative good old boy there was, right? And they were looking at it for the business aspect of the communication. And this church could not be more liberal. That was out there as airy-fairy as you could go. But both of these organizations, for very different reasons, thought that this neuro-linguistic stuff would be useful. And of course, that's how communication is. It's a broad-based, wonderful thing. I mean, today, employers would rather have somebody that is good at communications, that gets along well with people, even over job skills. I remember seeing this in a seminar. They were doing studies on this. Employers, these are the things they want the most. They can teach you how to do the job, but they can't teach people how to communicate or maybe get along better with others. That's our job. All right, so anyway, so I go, wow, this is something. So when I got in there, I became an NLP junkie right away. In fact, it would take NLP to get me off of NLP. Right? I mean, I was looking at it from so many different eyes. I was looking at it from my business, the job, because they were paying for it. I was looking at as a hypnotherapist, because I had, learned that. And I was looking at it from the spiritual healer, because that's supposed to be what I was supposed to be. And in all of those contexts, I was like, wow, this stuff's amazing. And in the area of hypnotherapy, I said, this teaches someone, this helps you understand how hypnosis works. You see, most hypnotherapy classes, maybe you've taken them, when you go into them, they teach you scripts. Right? They'll go in and say, well, we have this wonderful script we wrote or we got somewhere. It works, fine, whatever. What you do is you do this, and they'll go knocked out. This is how I learned it, first of all. And then, if it's whatever this problem is, here's a script for that or some suggestions for this. My brother got a master's degree in a distant learning hypnotherapy course, and they had the scripts. In fact, it was clever. They call it the prescription book. Hypnotic prescription. And it has suggestions for any possibility, some we can't even talk about in here, of what somebody may want out of suggestions of hypnosis. But they're all scripts. And this is the problem many times with the versatility of the hypnotist. Because see, if they did a study, which they do, they always need a control. The script is like a control, right? They go do a study, they say use a script, or they use some tape of some hypnotist doing something, and they say, because only 20% of the people may respond favorably to that script, that only 20% of the people can be hypnotized. I look at it as like they took them in a room and they played, they're going to do a study on who likes music, and they put, country music on there, and they might find that 20% of the people like music. They say, wow, that's music, and 80% of them are going, that's music, not having anything to do with it. But you could put the same group of people in there, play a different music, classical maybe, oldies or something, and you'd get the same result. About 20% probably would say, I like that music. It would just be a different 20%. And this is where Milton Erickson really made a difference, and NLP understanding Milton Erickson made a big difference, is because he tailored his communication to every client. When asked, Milton Erickson's asked, is there anyone you haven't been able to hypnotize? And he says, I don't know. I'm still working on them. and probably best known of anyone, to be able to listen and then tailor the communication so he's actually communicating to that particular person. And NLP recognized that in him. So they kind of formulated how they thought it was. And the interesting thing is, they did it very similar to how Keith says you should learn in this class. See, Richard Bandler works with John Grinder, and I understand that, see, Richard Bandler was so good because he always unconsciously modeled someone. He could do that. He could sit in a room, just watch them, listen to them, and then all of a sudden he could do it. And because he could do it, he would tell people like John Grinder and eventually Robert Dilts how he knows how to do it based on just observing them. And then they would put it in some kind of linear step-by-step process. And I always thought myself, I said, I like the unconscious modeling thing. See, in a lot of the classes, some people are writing notes. I know Keith did it for a purpose, but most of them are just trying to write them for later, which I'm not an NLP Nazi, so if you want to write notes, you can. But I want to let you know that learning is all up here, visual. See, every time you have to go down to write a note, you may drop your eyes, which, by the way, is not the best learning state. And, you pull your way from unconsciously learning or unconsciously modeling what's happening up here. I guess when I think about it all of a sudden, it's kind of like, I understand the new fad is listening to albums. The old albums. CDs were great, but albums apparently are better. Vinyl albums, right? The difference is, see, a CD has digital sound on it. So every sound is supposed to be, is digitally put there. But the analog version of an album has all the little nuances in between that you just can't get out of it's either there or not there. That expansion of that sound actually enhances it. And that's what we're talking about with unconscious learning. Every time you're here, you get all the variations if you're there present all the time, and that's what Keith is talking about. So anyhow, with that, I went into NLP, and then eventually as life coaching goes, I said how this could be used. And I really understood hypnosis, so when I put the school together, I said if you want to be a great hypnotherapist, you want to understand neurolinguistics and not just read a script. And luckily, I ran into that guy back there. Because we would have questions. One of our favorite times, we'd go to these classes for all these years, and we'd go out and we'd sit in a hot tub somewhere, and we just BS about, because we're both junkies, right? And he would come up with questions, or I might have a question, and we'd sit there like, well, we heard about this in hypnosis or NLP, we heard about that, or how would we deal with that, or how would maybe somebody do with that, and from those conversations, we kept adding more and more to this program. One thing, he helped get my ears to tune in so I could listen much better. And we have fun with it still today. We haven't been able to work with each other as much as over the years until now. Again, it's great to feel that synergy again. But a lot of things came out of it. Stuff I know you're not going to get anywhere else.